cruising, which has been a topic of concern over the last few months, in addition to some weapons-related offenses, which we believe are obviously contributing to some increases in violent crime. And to the left of me, to your right, as you can see, it was a very successful 3-day weekend. In all, made 45 total arrests, 27 of those being felonies. Many of these felony arrests were for charges such as felons in possession of a firearm, illegal possession of weapons with controlled dangerous substances, and possession of stolen firearms. We also seized 30 weapons, and as you can see by the evidence, a number of the weapons were loaded because we have the bullets, with those weapon systems. A lot of narcotics, illegal cash. Speaking of narcotics, over 700 grams of marijuana, 27 grams of methamphetamines, crack cocaine, powder cocaine, $10,000 in money. And although I'm proud of the efforts, and I'm glad to see that we were productive, I think what's concerning is that in a 3-day operation with a small number of officers, we seized over 30 firearms off the street that were illegal. The agents told me that they probably came across twice as many firearms in vehicles, but the other 30 or so were not illegal weapons. People were legally in possession. But it's concerning that we have that many people running the streets of Shreveport, especially participating in some of this cruising activity and other activities where you have a large number of people congregating in parking lots and businesses and intersections that are armed with weapons. And I think this is what's contributing to the violence. As you know, we did have a fairly violent weekend. We had 5 different shootings, a total of 10 victims. A couple of those were very serious injuries. And we have seen increases in our homicide rate in 2020. I just got the numbers for July, for the end of month in July. We're going to be releasing those within the next 24 to 48 hours. And although crime in many areas is down, in fact, we're actually one crime lower than we were last year at this time. So last year being the historical low in Part 1 crime, our total Part 1 crime in 2020 is actually lower at this point. But what is superseding that, and I think is what is more important, is the type of crime we are seeing, which is those 39 homicides. And that's what we're really trying to put a dent in, and that's why we've called in the Office of Special Legations to kind of lead some of these special operations. We wanted to put all the criminals on notice that we're not going to tolerate this activity. So these 30 firearms are just a drop in the bucket, which you can expect to see going forward. We need the activity to end. We need the cruising to end, the shooting to end, and those people that feel comfortable driving around with stolen firearms, or those felons that feel comfortable having firearms in their possession, we're looking for you, and we're going to come get them from you. Does anybody have any questions?
Do you think we gained on the crime in the Shreveport?
I think we are, and I think what leads to that again is if you look at most every other category, we're double digit down in a lot of areas. It's specifically in shootings and homicides that we're seeing those increases, which is concerning. I would rather have increases in some other area of crime, obviously, versus homicides. But obviously, there's some benefit to what the police officers are doing, right? If we weren't doing anything, if we weren't successful at all, we would have high crime across all categories. But being that it's specific to this one category, I think we know that we need to focus our efforts on a small segment of the population. A lot of this is gang activity, to be quite honest. We have some heightened gang activity within the city, and we have a lot of retaliatory shootings at this time that have been ongoing throughout the summer months. And that's really what we need to focus on by getting these weapons off the street.
Chief, we weren't alone this weekend in the amount of gun violence we experienced. At least 5 other cities had double-digit shootings and homicides. Do you contribute this not only to gangs, but I think the condition that we're in right now with the COVID and unrest, is that a contributing factor?
Yeah, I think you still have some of those contributing factors we've talked about in the past. So certainly the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has done some really weird things with crime numbers, and it's starting to cause problems that I'm sure are going to be attributed in studies in the future to people being forced to stay at home, not being employed, so therefore not having adequate income to be able to support themselves and their families. You have a lot of anti-law enforcement sentiment right now to some national events. I think that's going to certainly contribute to increased crime. You may have less proactivity from police officers nationwide. just because they are concerned about some of those calls for unfunding police and in this conversation about police use of force. So I think there's a lot of things that can contribute to the nationally high violent crime rates.
What would be the message to, I guess, people here in Shreveport after a violent weekend, especially for the shooting that we had on last week?
I think it's important for citizens to realize that the police department is doing their part. We have some officers out there working hard. Everybody's working overtime, putting in additional hours to make our streets safe. What we need is assistance from the citizens. You shouldn't allow a family member to leave the house with an illegal weapon in their car. You shouldn't allow a family member that's a convicted felon to be in possession of a firearm. You shouldn't allow a family member to break into somebody else's vehicle and take their weapons. So if you're aware of that activity, you need to report that to the police department. That's the only thing that's going to decrease crime. We need to be aware of activity before it occurs and be proactive in our approach. And I wish we had some more cooperation from citizens, both those that know about violent crime and those that are involved in violent crime, to help us, again, get those criminals off the streets and prevent it before it occurs.
All right, Chief, a lot of people, I seem to go back and kind of read the comments on a lot of my news posts, and a lot of citizens are wondering, like, if they see the great success that the department brings when officers are shot, or like mass shootings, or like the active shooters such we had, and with the joint operation of all of the different departments in, I guess, Northeast Louisiana, how you guys are successful so together. They're wondering, what are you guys doing to bridge together the collaboration of just regular shootings? Like you stated, you had 10 victims this weekend and 5 shootings. They want to know, what are your response to that, as in, what can we do to make sure every shooter gets treated that way and not just certain shootings?
So every shooting is going to be treated as if it were a homicide. We send a homicide investigator every time a person is struck with a bullet, which contributes to their large caseload. So we're not working 39 homicides. We're working probably 300 shootings. If you really want to help our investigators, though, you need to come forward with information. So if you're a victim in a shooting, and when an officer shows up on scene and says what happened, if you know something, don't say, I'm not sure. If you think that there's a reason somebody was shooting at you, don't say, I have no idea what somebody would shoot at me. If a family member is shot and you have some background as to the activities they may be involved in, don't tell our investigators you're not sure that they're not involved in any criminal activity. Just be truthful with us. We're trying to solve a shooting at that point. We're trying to solve a homicide at that point. We're not trying to point fingers at someone's lifestyle or what may have contributed. We want to get a criminal off the street before other people are injured or killed. But I can assure you that our officers treat every one of those with due respect, and they invest as much time as they can until they reach a dead end. But if you reach a dead end of the road and we don't have enough information, then there's really nowhere else we can go with that investigation. So that's why we depend on citizens to bring forward the information they have.
So do you have something in preparing for, like I'm saying, like collaborating with like state troopers, Sheriff's Department, Louisiana State,
Yeah.
like that?
Oh, most definitely. We work with all our law enforcement partners on a daily basis. We've got several federal task forces. The U.S. Marshals has a violent crimes task force. We have in fact, the Office of Special Investigations is a cooperation between the Shreveport Police Department and the Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office. The Louisiana State Police contributes quite often to many of our special operations, in addition to the daily duties that their troopers perform within Caddo Parish. So we have a lot of ties within the law enforcement community, and you alluded to it when you started off, looking at last week, the active shooter situation. And although I'm not talking about that situation, I think it leads to show how quickly we can have a large law enforcement presence to focus on one particular aspect. We have those same assets focused at violent crime in Shreveport. It's just not something that you see on a daily basis. It's not something that you may recognize because it's not necessarily a marked police unit with a uniformed officer in it. Many of these other special investigative divisions, they don't drive marked police units, and they look just like those of you in the audience. They don't look like police officers. It makes them more effective at their job.
Chief, where are these guns coming from?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, some of these guns were stolen out of vehicles in our driveways. And we've talked about this for several years that I'm aware of, about locking your vehicles up, not leaving valuables and firearms in your vehicle. It amazes me that we still have a large number of theft from autos where people are opening doors to unlock vehicles and taking firearms out of those vehicles. Or they're looking at a firearm on a seat in plain view and know that I need to bust the window out of this particular vehicle because my reward is going to be that firearm sitting there. So we've got to do a better job. The law-abiding citizens that purchase these weapons legally, we've got to keep them out of the hands of the criminals that don't need them. Oh, this is a small fraction, and it's hard. It's hard for me to say how many of these specific weapons were stolen from a law-abiding citizen, but I think it's fair to say that a large number of them were, and that certainly some of these weapons are coming out of our own hands as law-abiding citizens just from not locking them up. So. So we had over a dozen officers, and it varied a little bit night to night. But, you know, there's a lot of behind-the-scene things going on. We had our command bus out, so we have a visible presence in some of these areas. Again, we had additional jail staff to help process inmates. We had an additional police communications officer that worked a specialized channel just for these agents and officers so that they could handle their business and still have our patrol channels available for calls for service. So I think that's what's important to note is this was additional personnel. We didn't pull anybody off patrol. We still were responding to all the calls for service, but this was additional personnel for 3 nights, and you see the results of that. It will. You expect to see more of us in weeks to come until people quit cruising the streets with illegal weapons. I don't believe they played a role in this specific operation, but I'm a very big proponent of Crime Stoppers, and we do get a lot of illegal weapons and solve a lot of crimes because of the assistance we get from Crime Stoppers, no doubt. So,
how many different neighborhoods did you guys go through to get all of this?
we pretty much were in 1 or 2 policing areas, 3 to 4 neighborhoods, if you will. So this is the areas that we historically this summer have had problems with cruising operations, shots fired calls, and some violent crime as of lately.
And for those of us that don't know where these items go, can you explain it if you're allowed to?
Where they go once they're in our possession? Yes. Yeah, so all this evidence will be processed and brought to our evidence property management facility, and it'll be held there to be used by the district attorney's office or the U.S. attorney's office, whatever jurisdiction that those suspects are going to be processed through for conviction, ultimate conviction. And then most likely the majority of these weapons, if not all of them, will be destroyed at some point in the future.
One more question.
Okay, that's for the money. What about that?
And the money, depending on the circumstances, some of it might be applicable for seizure if it was obtained illegally during the sale of narcotics. Other portions of it might just be used evidentiary and then released to the rightful owner. It really just depends on the individual case. But thank everybody for coming out this afternoon.